You are listening to 13 Past Midnight with Steve Stockton.
People have haunted houses, but a haunted workplace? Here's one of my encounters from Las Vegas concerning the experiences I had while working in a haunted casino, Bally's. The Bally's Casino on the Strip in Las Vegas has a long and tragic history. It was the original site of the MGM Grand, which was partially destroyed by fire in 1980, causing 82 people to lose their lives. For a couple of years in the mid-2000s, I managed the in-house photo lab at Bally's Hotel and Casino on the Las Vegas Strip. What a lot of people don't realize is that the current Bally's is really just a retrofit of the previously existing towers where people died, with the new section facing the Las Vegas Strip. The company I worked for had the souvenir photo concession for all the major casinos in Las Vegas. If you've ever been to a show in Vegas, or had a meal in one of the more upscale restaurants in the casinos, then you've no doubt been approached by a camera girl, or camera boy as the case may be, asking to take your photo to preserve the moment for posterity. After they get several shots, they scurry off to the photo lab, which is generally hidden in the bowels of the casino, to have the pictures printed. Then, upon their return, they have the photos all nicely packaged in simulated faux leatherette albums and try their best to hustle you for as much as they can. As with practically everything in Vegas, it's meant to fleece the flock, and does so very well. The owners of the photography concession have been doing business in Las Vegas casinos since the 1960s, and own such multi-millionaire fluff as McMansions and Maybach automobiles to show for their efforts. At Bally's, the photo lab was located on the second floor, just above the showroom where Jubilee, which was one of Vegas' remaining Showgirl Review holdovers, and other shows were presented. If you've ever seen any of the old Dean Martin celebrity roasts from the 1970s, then you've seen the showroom. They're one and the same. These roasts were held at the old MGM, pre-fire, of course. The area upstairs above the theater is known as the Celebrity Hallway, and is where the green room and celebrity dressing rooms were located for the Dean Martin shows, and anything else performed and or broadcast from the old MGM. Down at one end of the hallway, snugged back into a corner, is the photo lab. At one time, the camera girls used actual film cameras and would scurry back to the lab only to have to wait on the chemical process that developed the film and photos. However, the advent of digital photography has changed the souvenir photography landscape. No longer is there any film to be developed, and even the labs that still use a wet printer, meaning it has tanks that hold liquid developer, bleach, and water, can have your photo ready to go in a matter of minutes. The photo lab at Bally's had smaller rooms where giant chemical tanks sit empty, silent reminders of the film photography legacy of days gone by. The place has a very old, almost abandoned feel to it, even though it's in use 7 days a week, 365 days a year. As the casinos never close, so goes the souvenir photo concession. It was mainly in the smaller anterooms where the strangeness resided. Other than the general feeling of something being off and not right just from walking into the photography lab, I began experiencing things from the very start. As the manager, I was the lab key holder and usually arrived an hour or so before the lab officially went into operation. I fired up the machinery and made sure all the Nikon cameras, bead flash units, and batteries were all good and ready to go. On my first day alone at Bally's, I unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and walked right into what I could only describe as a column of ice-cold air. The column seemed to dissipate quickly, and I chalked it up to perhaps faulty air conditioning or having something to do with opening the lab doors after they had been sealed for 15 hours or so. I shrugged it off and went about my business of getting the wet photo printer and cameras ready for the night's activities. As I walked into one of the back rooms to remove some Nikon batteries from their chargers, I noticed a couple of things. One, the electrical access panel on the wall was open, revealing all the breakers for the lab. I closed the hinged access panel and snapped the latch, making sure it was secured firmly. Two, I noticed that another back room off the one I was in was open. It had sliding wooden pocket doors and had originally been the dark room back in the days when the lab processed actual film. and darkroom was a fitting sobriquet. The room looked to be pitch black just beyond the doorway. I peeked in, found it empty, and slid the pocket door closed, turning the latch. After readying the cameras and accompanying flash units with fresh batteries, I set about firing up the wet printer. It had a series of self-tests and strips it processed to ensure that the chemical mix in the bleach and developer tanks were correct. After starting this process, I walked into the back room where the batteries had been charging in order to charge the used batteries I'd just taken out of the cameras and flash units. Rounding the corner, two things immediately struck me. The electrical access panel was open again, ajar about 2 or 3 inches. Also, the darkroom door was not only open again as well, the one dim bulb that hung from the ceiling was also lit. More perplexed than scared, I tried to brush it off. I knew I was the only person in the lab. I'd unlocked the door myself and had locked it behind me. It would remain locked until about a half hour before my photographers and other support personnel were due to arrive. Plus, the lab, while cavernous in some regards, was actually a series of small rooms. There was no way anyone could have come in or have been already hidden inside without being seen. Dutifully, I closed and latched the panel again. Also slid the pocket door closed after turning out the sole light in the old dark room. A few minutes later, I once again walked in the back to retrieve some large rolls of Kodak photographic paper, which I would need to get through the number of prints that would be made that evening. And, once again, I was not really surprised to find the electrical access panel open. This time, instead of just a crack, it was open and flung back as far as possible. The pocket door was completely open, and the light was on again in the dark room. "All right, fine," I spoke aloud to the empty lab. "If you want things that way, I'll leave them that way." And I did. The electrical access panel remained open, the pocket door open, and the darkroom light on. This seemed to appease whatever I was dealing with, and I didn't have any more trouble. A lot of times, at the end of the shift, I would shut the same doors and turn the darkroom light off, only to find the doors open and the light on the next day when I unlocked the lab, although I'd been the last to leave and no one had been in afterwards. One day, while I was opening the lab and getting ready for the night's photo printing, one of my bosses, a large Serbian man named Gordon, dropped by the lab to bring some new larger memory cards for the cameras. "I always hated when I had to work in this lab," he stated, having started as a lab manager and worked his way up into middle management. "It always felt like I was being watched, and there's a door that won't stay closed and a light that won't stay turned off." I nodded my head in agreement, even though he didn't mention the electrical access panel. He stuck his head into the dark room and then hurriedly left. I got the distinct feeling he'd had other, slightly more sinister experiences. Another time, I was sitting in the lab waiting for the photographers to arrive. My runners that evening, and runners were the people that helped the photographers package and sell their shots after the show broke, were 2 Hispanic cousins, still in their late teens. We were just sort of sitting and shooting the breeze when all of a sudden a very strange thing happened. What I can only describe as a black, shapeless mist came out of a wall of cabinets, crossed the room we were in, about 25 feet, and then disappeared into the opposite wall. I wasn't going to say anything, just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, but it turns out I didn't have to. The cousins erupted with shock, surprise, and quite a bit of profanity. They had seen the same thing that I'd witnessed, and both were scared out of their wits. They took it as some sort of omen or warning and insisted that they had to leave immediately. I tried in vain to talk them into staying, but they signed out and left the premises. I managed to get through the night with the help of another runner sent over from Caesar's Palace across the street and myself. I didn't mention the black shape to anyone and observed no ill effects from the manifestation. There was also an entity in a nearby men's room that myself and a cameraman, who claimed to be a sensitive or psychic, dubbed the Snorer. This was due to the fact that certain times, both day and night, we opened the lab early on Saturdays for matinee shows in the Jubilee Theater. We could often hear what sounded like someone contentedly snoring away in the very last stall, enjoying a snooze on the job. The thing was, however, we both verified several times that the stall in question was empty, and my cameraman even claimed to have once heard the snoring while he was inside the very stall. I always avoided it because the snoring and occasionally stirring and shifting sounds already made me feel intrusive, just being in the same restroom, let alone the same stall. We gathered that perhaps the snorer was an employee of the old MGM who was napping on the job and sadly died of smoke inhalation. All in all, Ballys was, shall we say, a very interesting place to work. I put in a couple of years as lab manager there before being promoted out to the Rio Hotel and Casino, which is another story for another time. The Rio's Voodoo Steakhouse Lounge on the top of the casino has its own unexplained activity.